oh my god, it's awesome. This track just brings it. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am Molly, and in this video I am going to be ranking all 7 studio albums from the progressive metal band Leprous. Now, Leprous is a very new band for me. I have only very recently been getting into their music just because a lot of you have been recommending that I check them out in the comments of my other videos. So I figured I would listen to their whole discography, give it a thorough listen, see what I thought of it. I also know that they had a new album come out earlier this year, Aphelion, and I kind of wanted to give that one a listen too. So yeah, I figured I would just do a little Leprous album ranking and see which of their albums ends up being my favorite. Alright, so I have my little ranking system set up for all of these Leprous albums. A+ are going to be the albums I think are absolutely amazing. A is going to be for the albums that are very close to perfect. B are the albums that are kind of right in the middle, just very solid. C are going to be the albums that kind of fade into the background. There's nothing necessarily memorable about them. And D are going to be the albums that I just am not that into. So starting off, we have Leprous's debut album, Tall Poppy Syndrome. This one was released in 2009. It has a very almost theatrical edge to its sound. There's also a lot of jazzy kind of upbeat qualities about it as well. Very, very avant-garde metal music, I would call it. Like it has elements of metal, but I don't know, there's just like this very kind of fun theatrical flair to its sound. It also has a lot of portions that are a little bit more melodic, very soft and soothing, and I will be honest, these kind of softer parts of Tall Poppy Syndrome, I don't personally really find myself getting into. It kind of just becomes a little bit monotonous at times, and it's like I just want a little bit more punchiness when those slower melodic moments come in. When this album does bring the energy though, I do really enjoy it. It's super fun. I love all the electric guitar too on this album. The track Dare You, for example, there's definitely more intensity on this one. I love the heavier instrumentation. There's a great almost snappiness to the sound of this one, which I really enjoy. And the track He Will Kill Again is awesome. I really like this one. It has almost a darker, borderline industrial tone to it. And I love the piano and all of the jazzy elements too that they throw on this track. And the track Fate is kind of a good example of what I was talking about, where the energetic portions of this track are amazing. I love them. But then when the more melodic chunks come in, I kind of lose interest. For me, it becomes a little bit more lackluster in its sound. So I will be honest, I'm a little bit torn on Tall Poppy Syndrome. I definitely like elements of it. There's certain chunks and certain tracks that are really entertaining to listen to, but I think ultimately I'm going to put Tall Poppy Syndrome in C. In their entire discography, for me, it's kind of a forgettable one. It's not really one that stands out in a lot of ways. Alright, up next is Bilateral. This one came out in 2011. This album, comparing it to their debut Tall Poppy Syndrome, is definitely a little bit more modern, futuristic sounding. There's a slightly heavier edge to this one. And they throw in some electronic stuff too. There's some synths and there's just like a futuristic sound that this album has. It's got a very smooth quality to its tone. There's less of those kind of fun, playful, jazzy bits that they throw in as well. At points too, it almost gives off like Muse vibes, because Muse has this very theatrical tone to a lot of their music, and Leprous does that too. They definitely incorporate some of that, just like this grand, big sound to what they do. And even though this album does have that harder edge to it, it still definitely incorporates a lot of more melodic bits, some slower parts with a lot more restraint as well. The track Forced Entry is a 10-minute song that just goes all over the place. It's really cool, actually. I love how it starts so melodic sounding, and then around the halfway point it just brings the intensity. It just completely changes. And then around the 7-minute mark, it becomes really atmospheric sounding and a little bit darker. And then with that ending too, this is just a great track. Also the track Cryptogenic Desires, with that harder edge to it, it's just a really fun track. I definitely seem to prefer Leprous's sound when they go a little bit harder, when they kind of bring a little more intensity to their music. There are a few tracks on Bilateral though I'm not really sold on. The track Thorn almost has a weird Spanish flair to its sound, which I don't know. I didn't really get into this one. It's interesting. It's a little bit different. It just didn't really win me over with its sound. And also the track Indifferentia, the start of this one that's more melodic. Again, it just kind of was a little bit monotonous for me. It didn't really go anywhere. Later on, this track builds and it improves in my opinion. But at the start, I don't know. I was just kind of, I lost interest a little bit. So overall, Bilateral definitely has some strong moments on it, but it's kind of like Tall Poppy Syndrome for me. I think in their entire discography, it kind of fades into the background. It's not necessarily a really memorable album. So for that reason, I think I am going to also put Bilateral in C, and I think I'm going to put it underneath Tall Poppy Syndrome. Up next is going to be Leprous's 2013 album Coal. This one is definitely the most kind of rock, metal, dark, intense album of their first three. And they take kind of what they did on their first two albums and they just make it so cohesive. They bring it together more. They incorporate, like I said, a little bit of a darker, heavier tone, and it just creates a fantastic sound. What I really noticed too on Coal is they still take that melodic edge to their sound and they incorporate it with the harder driving metal sound, and they just make it really cohesive on this album. On their first two albums, it's a little bit more disjointed, like all the sounds going on, and this third album Coal, it flows so seamlessly. Just everything works perfectly together and it's so smooth from one track into the next. The opening track, Foe, is just such an immense start to this album. It just sets such this epic soundscape up, and then they've got this really dreamy, ethereal vibe too with the chanting. And I love the percussion on this track too. It's just a great opener. The track, The Valley, is amazing. It might be my favorite track on this whole album. The guitars on this one are just so thunderous. They have such an impactful sound, and then they incorporate a little bit of synth too. They just bring in like a little electronic edge, which is so fun, and I think it suits their sound really, really well. And also the last track, Contaminate Me, was a standout. I really liked how there's that haunting violin, and then they pair it with the kind of growly sounding vocals. It's just super captivating. It's kind of a chilling end to this album. Like I said, they definitely go in a darker direction with the tone on this one, which I actually prefer. I just really enjoy that sound to Leprous's music. So I'm just going to cut right to the chase and put Coal in A+. I think it's a fantastic album. There's really nothing I can pinpoint that I would want to change about this album, so for me it's an A+. Alright, and up next is Leprous' 2015 album, The Congregation. This one, in terms of its tone, I thought was pretty similar to Coal, with that darker edge, more streamlined, extremely cohesive. However, I think there's a little bit more of an electronic undercurrent to The Congregation, comparing it to Coal. Again, they do a great job on The Congregation of infusing their really melodic, angelic vocals and that softer side with their heavier, more intense metal side. They just blend that super well, and it's extremely balanced in its sound. Like, it's just really cohesive. It's really interesting too. At points, The Congregation gave me some pretty strong Bjork vibes, like Bjork kind of post and homogenic era, just with how they fuse a little bit darker intensity alternative rock kind of with some electronic elements. Like the track Army of Me by Bjork kind of in a weird way reminds me of moments on The Congregation. The track Rewind just has such a cool sound to it, again with some electronic elements and how it starts with that really atmospheric beginning. I love too how this track lyrically it's saying build up, tear down, and that is almost what it sounds like the track is doing with the instrumentals. It's just really cool. The track The Flood is my favorite song on The Congregation, and it might be my favorite Leprous track in general. It just has such an incredible build up from the really dark, quiet, atmospheric start into the chorus that just brings the energy, and then it just becomes more upbeat sounding almost at the end. It just kind of, it picks up its tempo a little bit. And also the track Red was a standout. This is one that reminded me of Bjork, like I said, Army of Me or something like that by Bjork. It just has this really experimental electronic edge to it, which is really cool. I enjoyed the sound. And I really liked the plucky guitar on Red too, just really fun. So The Congregation by Leprous, overall I think this album is just a fantastic fusion of experimental, borderline electronic metal at points, paired with really beautiful melodic vocals, and it's just such a seamless album with its sound. So I'm going to put The Congregation by Leprous in A+. It's right on par with Cole. I think I slightly prefer Cole over The Congregation, but they're both fantastic albums. Up next is Malina, Leprous's 2017 album. This one, again, kind of sonically similar to The Congregation and Cole. I think it's a little bit less dark though, and they kind of play around again with more electronic elements to the tone of this album. It has those typical just grandiose, soaring vocals, but they overlay it on top of like electronic sounds, and I don't know, there's just a very futuristic kind of synthy electronic vibe to this album, and then they just throw in some industrial moments as well. It's just a really cool sound. The track Bonneville is fantastic. It is my favorite track on Malina. It just has such a fascinating sound. It's weirdly like relaxingly electronic, but they throw in some jazzy elements as well, kind of reminiscent of like their first two albums. But then when that wave of energy and sound hits, oh my god, it's awesome. This track just brings it. The track From the Flame is also definitely a standout. The vocals on this one are so impressive, how strong yet so clear they are. And the breakdown at the end of the track Mirage is just epic, just fantastic instrumentation. So ultimately Malina is a really well done album. I love the slight change of tone with this one. It goes in a more electronic direction for sure. I don't really have anything to fault this album for, but just comparing it to Cole and The Congregation, it's not for me personally on par with those two. So for that reason, I think I'm going to put Malina in A, but it's a fantastic album. I thoroughly enjoy listening to it. Up next is Leprous's 2019 album called Pitfalls. This one, they bring back a little bit more of that jazzy sound that, again, they kind of started their discography off with. And they pair it with an introduction of some softer sounds too. They've got some choral elements and they've got some harp on this album as well. And again, they just have that great smooth sound. Like there's no jarring elements at all. It's very cohesive. The track Below serves as a great opener, just with, again, how strong the vocals are on this one. And it has that really streamlined sound to it. And the track Alleviate, there's something to me that's very touching, almost emotional about the sound of this track. And the track Distant Bells just has this really grand soaring instrumentation that just gives it such an immense sound. So Pitfalls, I'm kind of again torn on this one. I wouldn't say it's necessarily Leprous's most memorable album. I kind of at times wanted a little bit more of an energetic impact from this one, but I think from a technical standpoint, it's better than their first two. So I think I'm going to put Pitfalls in B. I think I'm going to put it right there. All right, and last up is Leprous' most recent album that came out earlier this year, Aphelion, released in 2021. This one has a very melodic, angelic sound to it. It's very relaxed, almost dreamlike, very ethereal quality to its tone. It's definitely the lightest the lead singer's voice has sounded on all of their previous albums in their discography, and there's like these really light, airy harmonies as well going on this album. They still have those theatrical flares and a little bit more drama that they introduce to the tone of this album, but they pair it with like that really light, airy sound really well. It's interesting. It's not really like a metal album. They infuse portions of metal and heavier tones on this album, but it's really relaxing at the same time. The track Silhouette was definitely a standout. This one has a little bit more energy that they bring to it. I just love the really cool electronic start to this one, and it just is actually kind of groovy in an interesting way. Also, the track Have You Ever is a really interesting one. I like the electronic tone at the start with that distorted bass going on, and again with kind of a jazzy, borderline groovy tone on the chorus of this one. They just bring a little bit more of that fun energy. I think overall Aphelion is a really well crafted album. I like the sound of it. I actually like the lighter, more melodic side to Leprous's sound. However, when when they did bring the intensity, I found myself wanting more of it, and they didn't quite deliver that on this album. The track Castaway Angels is a really good example of that. The end of this track is fantastic with all of that guitar and everything, but I wanted more of it and sooner in the track. I do think it's a really well put together album though. I like the overall sound of it, so I think I'm going to put Aphelion in B, and I think I would put it above Pitfalls. They're pretty much on par with each other, but I think I slightly prefer Aphelion. So there you have it. That is my final Leprous album ranking. So in A+, the perfect albums, we have Cole and The Congregation. In A, so extremely solid albums, we have Malina. The albums in B, so the ones that don't quite rise to the top, but I really enjoy listening to elements of them, we have Aphelion and Pitfalls. And then in C, the kind of meh, forgettable albums, we have Tall Poppy Syndrome and Bilateral. And then I wouldn't put any Leprous albums in D. I enjoy listening to all of them, and they all have qualities about their tone that I really enjoy. Alright, so that is going to conclude my ranking for all 7 studio albums from the experimental metal band Leprous. I really enjoyed getting into Leprous's music. They have some fantastic projects that they've done, and I really did enjoy hearing all 7 of these albums. They've all got a slightly different edge to their sound, which was cool. I liked the mix of electronic and then melodic and some jazzy, more upbeat qualities too. I think they're a great band with a great sound, and if you haven't heard Leprous's stuff, definitely check out their albums. Let me know what you think of my ranking too, if you agree or disagree with me. And yeah, as usual, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned, and I will see you in the next video.